Hello from Mindset Daily, wishing you a day full of health, peace, and happiness. Thank you for watching the Mindset Daily channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support us. Thank you so much. Have you ever noticed how the loudest person in the room isn't always the strongest? What if silence, not shouting, was the true mark of strength? And could it be that stillness speaks louder than any defense ever could? You see, in this world we live in, people often mistake noise for power. They believe that raising their voice will make them right. That bold declarations, fast answers, and quick comebacks are the keys to winning in life. But here's something life has quietly and powerfully taught me. Something we all need to pause and consider. True power never needs to shout. Real strength doesn't compete for attention. It doesn't need a spotlight or a stage. When it enters the room, it brings a presence, an unshakable calm that shifts the atmosphere without saying a word. Silence isn't the absence of strength, it's the evidence of it. It belongs to those who have seen enough, who have learned that storms don't respond to screaming. They remain still because they know exactly who calms the seas. Think about Jesus for a moment. Standing before Pilate, surrounded by accusers, mocked, insulted, and spat upon. He didn't defend himself. He didn't argue. He didn't even raise his voice. And yet, in that silence, there was unmatched power. Not because he was defeated, but because he had already conquered. His silence didn't reflect weakness. It revealed strength deeper than words. There will be moments in your own life when the wisest thing you can do is remain silent. Not because you lack the truth, not because you don't have something to say, but because that moment simply doesn't deserve the weight of your voice. And that brings us to something even deeper, what silence can actually unlock in your life. Sometimes, silence isn't just about holding your tongue. It's about guarding your peace. As we just saw, true strength is often quiet. And now, let's take that truth one step deeper. Not everything deserves your peace. You don't owe explanations to people who were never present when God whispered your purpose into your heart. You don't need to defend your direction to those who were never meant to walk alongside you. Silence, in this sense, isn't weakness, it's a decision. A mature, steady, faith-filled decision. It's the choice to grow past the need for approval and rise above the trap of reacting to every criticism. It's easy to fire back. It's easy to prove a point. But it takes discipline to remain still when your spirit is stirred. It takes real character to walk away, not in defeat, but in faith, trusting that God will speak on your behalf in ways no words ever could. When you choose silence, you're not pretending the storm doesn't exist. You're declaring, without saying a word, that the storm doesn't control your destiny. You're not being passive. You're giving God room to lift you above the noise rather than being dragged into it. There's a sacred difference. Because when you speak at the wrong time, you might unknowingly delay what God is ready to release in your life. But when you remain silent with confidence, you place everything in His hands, and His hands never fail. To the one listening right now, you don't have to raise your voice to prove your value. You don't need to win arguments to be understood. Sometimes, the most powerful statement you can make is to stay quiet and let God be your defender. Let your journey speak. Let your strength speak. Let your transformation speak. And maybe, just maybe, the heaviness you're feeling isn't from the wrong path, but from conversations you were never supposed to carry. Now, let's talk about what happens when you finally put those conversations down. When you finally stop carrying conversations that were never yours to begin with, something shifts. You begin to realize how much energy you've been spending on battles that were never meant to be fought with words. You're feeling drained. Not because you're weak or out of alignment, but because you keep responding to things that are beneath your purpose. Every time you answer a petty remark or defend yourself against a baseless accusation, you lose a little bit of the clarity that was meant to guide you. The truth is, not everything deserves your answer. Not every insult requires a response. Sometimes, the only way to protect your peace and preserve your purpose is through silence. Think about it. What if silence was the only thing strong enough to keep your spirit clean while the world tried to stain your name? And here's what's comforting. God hears what they say when you're not around. He sees the ones who smile to your face but whisper behind your back. You don't have to expose them. You don't have to retaliate. If you stay silent, if you choose not to descend to their level, God will step in. And He won't just deal with it privately. He will set a table for you. Not in secret, not in a quiet corner, but right there in the full presence of your enemies. And you won't have to utter a single word. Your silence will speak for you. Your restraint will be your vindication. There is a sacred kind of peace that settles in your soul when you finally understand that you don't owe anyone an explanation for what God is doing in your life. Yes, people may question how you arrived where you are. They might wonder why blessings are falling into your lap, why doors keep opening in your favor. But they weren't there when you cried through the night. They didn't witness the private sacrifices, the quiet battles, the prayers whispered through tears. So why waste your voice trying to explain something they were never meant to understand? Let them talk. Let them wonder. While they gossip, keep growing. While they slander, keep soaring. While they plot, keep walking forward, head high and heart anchored. Because when you master the discipline of silence, you'll find yourself stepping into spaces your enemies swore you'd never reach. And in the next part, we'll explore how this quiet confidence unlocks a level of favor that can't be earned through words, only through unwavering faith. As we just explored, silence can take you places your enemies never thought you'd reach. But what happens when you finally arrive? When the blessings begin to unfold, you will receive blessings the world said you didn't deserve. And when that moment comes, when you walk through doors they swore would stay shut, don't look back to gloat. Don't fire back with "I told you so." Don't throw shade or try to prove a point. Just smile. Just keep walking forward. Because that's what the truly silent do. They don't make noise about their victory. They embody it. They don't need to announce their breakthrough. Because their life begins to speak louder than their words ever could. So today, make a decision. Choose silence. Not because you're powerless, but because you've grown wise. Not because you're afraid to speak, but because you trust the one who fights for you. Not because you don't have the words, but because you know exactly who speaks on your behalf. Be still and let God show you what He can do when you stop trying to narrate your own outcome. Because often in life, the transformation doesn't come from what we say, it comes from what we surrender. There are seasons when God will invite you into silence, not to punish you, but to prepare you. He'll ask you to pause, to quiet your mind, and to release your need to control. Why? Because sometimes God works best in the spaces where we say the least. We live in a noisy world. Everywhere you turn, people are talking, posting, shouting their opinions. Everyone wants to be noticed. Everyone wants to be heard, seen, praised, validated. But heaven doesn't move at the sound of human noise. It moves in response to faith. And true faith, it doesn't always come with volume. Sometimes real faith is completely silent. It kneels down in quiet surrender and whispers, "God, I trust you," even when nothing makes sense. There are blessings that haven't arrived yet. Not because you aren't worthy of them, but because your spirit is too distracted to receive the next instruction. So what happens when you finally quiet the world around you and the noise within you? Let's explore that in the next part. In the last part, we uncovered how silence positions your spirit to receive what distractions often drown out. But what happens when you let that silence guide your heart instead of just quieting your surroundings? You cannot follow divine direction if you're filling every space with your own opinions. You can't hear God's whisper when you're doing all the talking. And here's something you may not realize. Some of the greatest breakthroughs you're praying and hoping for aren't waiting on more action. They're waiting on a quiet heart, not a quiet life. Because life will always come with movement, responsibilities, and noise. But a quiet heart, that's something different. It's a heart that trusts when the answer doesn't come right away. A heart that listens even when it would be easier to react. A heart that doesn't rush God's timing, because it's fully convinced that His timing is perfect. When was the last time you sat in complete silence? Not scrolling, not checking notifications, not talking or strategizing, but just being in God's presence. Just surrendered? Some of the most powerful, soul-altering moments in my walk with God didn't come during loud worship or passionate prayers. They came in stillness. In that sacred hush where the noise of the world fades and your soul leans in with full attention. That's the place where God whispers the next step. That's the place where He corrects what your pride missed. That's where healing begins. Not the surface level healing, but the deep kind that silence makes room for. You see, choosing silence isn't stepping away from the battle. It's stepping fully into God's presence. It's saying, Lord, I don't have to fight this my way. I'm finished trying to fix what I was never meant to control. I release it into your hands. And when you truly reach that point of surrender, things begin to shift. Doors open that you never even knocked on. Paths clear that you didn't even know were there. God begins to move, not because you forced it, but because your stillness made room for His power. And in the next part, we'll see just how far that stillness can take you. When faith speaks not through words, but through quiet obedience. Previously, we talked about how stillness makes space for God to move in powerful, unexpected ways. Now, let's go deeper into the kind of silence that brings peace even in the middle of the storm. He brings peace into situations where you thought anxiety would consume you. He brings calm where you expected chaos. But it all begins in silence. It starts with trust, real trust, the kind that doesn't demand constant noise to feel safe. Some of you have been speaking too much to people and too little to God. You've been explaining your pain, defending your choices, venting your frustrations, hoping someone out there will finally understand what you're going through. But here's the truth. People can't fix what only God was designed to heal. They can't carry burdens that only God has the strength to lift. And the more you keep turning to noise for comfort, the more you delay the answer that can only be found in sacred stillness. There's a reason Jesus often withdrew from the crowds. It wasn't because He was tired of performing miracles or frustrated with people. It was because He understood something that we so easily forget in this fast, loud world. Silence with the Father is not optional, it's essential. That kind of quiet communion is what refuels the soul. It resets your thoughts. It realigns your purpose. You can't pour into others when your own spirit is constantly surrounded by noise. Even Jesus, the Savior of the world, had to be still in order to remain strong. And right now, I want to speak directly to the one who feels ignored. The one who's been praying, crying, waiting, wondering why heaven seems silent. You've asked yourself, why isn't God answering me? But maybe the silence isn't rejection. Maybe it's divine alignment. Maybe God isn't ignoring you. Maybe He's inviting you, gently, patiently, to stop talking long enough to truly listen. And when you lean in, when you get quiet enough, you might begin to notice that He's been speaking all along. Through the closed doors, through the delays, through the breakdowns that are actually making room for breakthroughs. Because sometimes it takes spiritual maturity to understand that God's silence doesn't mean He's not working. It often means He's doing His deepest work in ways you can't yet see. And in the next part, we'll explore how learning to embrace that silence can become your greatest weapon of faith. In the last part, we saw that God often does His deepest work in silence. But what if that silence is not just preparation, but the very space where miracles are born? Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't begin with noise or applause. They begin in the dark. Think about the seed buried in the soil. It makes no sound, yet beneath the surface, It's breaking open and taking root. Consider the baby forming in the womb, completely silent, yet being wonderfully and fearfully made. Even the caterpillar inside the cocoon utters no cry, but in that hidden stillness, transformation is happening. So why do we believe that change must always come with noise? Why do we assume that the louder we get, the more God will move? God is not activated by volume. He is stirred by surrender. He doesn't require constant reminders of the promises He made to you. He hasn't forgotten. But He may be waiting on something else, your stillness. He may be holding back the release, not out of delay, but because He's waiting for your quiet trust before revealing the next door. Because when you're still, truly still, your perspective changes. Your spiritual eyes begin to open. Your ears become more sensitive to His voice. Your faith no longer clings to outward signs, but rests securely in the unseen. And that's when you're no longer just capable of receiving the blessing. You're finally ready to carry it with grace, with strength, and with wisdom. So stop trying to out-talk your doubts. Stop exhausting yourself, trying to silence critics, prove your worth, or win invisible battles online. You don't need to post it. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to justify what God is doing in your life. Just be still. God is not deaf to your prayers. He's not blind to your pain. And He's certainly not late. He's simply waiting for you to get quiet enough to finally hear His gentle direction. This is the way. Walk in it. And the truth is, you never realize how valuable your peace is until you feel it slipping away. Until you're drained, not from labor, but from empty conversations, from defending yourself to people who've already decided who they think you are, from reacting to every sideways comment, glance, or word thrown your way. So what would happen if you just stopped reacting and let your peace do the talking? Let's continue there in the next part. In the previous part, we explored how protecting your peace often begins with choosing not to react. And in that stillness, something powerful becomes clear. That's when it finally hits you. Your peace is more precious than proving your point. And in moments of tension, silence becomes more than a pause. It becomes your shield. It protects you from battles that aren't worth fighting, from conversations that don't deserve your energy. There are things in life that simply aren't worth your voice. Not because you don't care, not because you're weak, but because you've matured enough to know that true strength doesn't lash out. It listens, it learns, and most often, it chooses not to respond at all. Every time you give energy to something that doesn't align with your purpose, there's a cost. You pay with your attention. You pay with your clarity. You pay with time that was meant to be invested in your calling. And many of us, if we're honest, are spiritually drained. Not because we've been disobedient, but because we've been distracted. We've poured our focus into battles we were never meant to fight. We've allowed the noise of the world to pull us into arguments that dim our light and steal our peace. We've let our hearts become punching bags for other people's frustrations. And we've used our precious platform, not to speak life, but to defend ourselves against attacks that don't even deserve acknowledgement. But listen closely, you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't need to justify yourself to those determined to misunderstand you. Not every accusation demands a response. Not every provocation deserves your breath. Because sometimes silence is your greatest defense. Silence is a boundary. And boundaries are what protect what matters most. What's sacred is your calling. What's sacred is your peace. What's sacred is your walk with God. And when you choose to respond to every offense, every whisper of gossip, every calculated post designed to provoke you, you're handing over your peace to people who never earned it and who are incapable of protecting it. So the next time you feel the urge to respond, ask yourself, is this worth trading my peace? And in the next part, we'll look at how guarding your peace isn't just protection. It's preparation for the next level God is leading you into. In the last part, we explored how setting boundaries through silence protects what's sacred, your purpose, you're calling your peace. But when you give your energy away to what doesn't deserve it, something deeper happens. That's not wisdom, it's self-sabotage. There comes a point in your spiritual walk where your silence is no longer about them. It's about Him. You no longer stay quiet because of who people are. You stay quiet because of who God is. You've come to know that the battle was never yours to begin with. The burden? Not yours to carry. The outcome? Never in your hands to control. Your only assignment? Stand still. Hold your peace. Let the Lord fight for you. There's a powerful scripture that says, "In quietness and trust shall be your strength." That's more than poetic. It's profoundly practical. When you stop chasing validation, stop responding to every comment, stop explaining yourself to people who are never meant to understand you, something shifts. You begin to find a strength you didn't know you had, a clarity that doesn't depend on outside approval, a peace that doesn't come from silence alone, but from surrender. But let's be honest, this isn't easy. It's not easy to stay silent when you've been misjudged. It's not easy to hold your tongue when someone is twisting your truth. It's not easy to walk away when you know you could win the argument with just a few words. But God isn't calling you to win debates. He's calling you to win the war within, the battle between pride and peace, between proving and trusting. He's not asking you to be right in their eyes. He's inviting you to be righteous in His. That means you don't have to explain why you've stepped away from certain people. You don't have to justify the quiet decisions you've made to protect your soul. You don't owe anyone an explanation for the boundaries that guard your peace. Because peace isn't just protection, it's evidence of alignment. And in the next part, we'll discover how silence, grounded in trust, becomes the foundation for supernatural breakthroughs. In the previous section, we were reminded that we don't need to explain our peace to anyone, and that righteousness in God's eyes matters more than approval from the crowd. Now, let's lean deeper into what that peace looks like in motion. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is smile, say nothing, and simply keep walking. Not because you don't have something to say, but because your silence is a sign of growth. It's proof that healing is taking place. It's evidence that your strength is rooted in something deeper than applause or approval. Let them talk. Let them assume. Let them misunderstand who you are and what you're doing. Because the truth is, they talked about Jesus too. They questioned Him. They accused Him. They mocked Him. And still, He fulfilled His purpose. Still, He rose. Still, He changed the entire world. And how'd He do it? Not through heated debates. Not by defending Himself at every turn. But through quiet obedience. Through unshakable presence. Through complete trust in the Father. So if He could stand silently before His accusers, fully aware of His identity, fully secure in His mission, so can you. You don't have to defend yourself when heaven has already taken up your cause. You don't have to react when your reaction could cost you your peace. Just because someone is loud doesn't mean they're right. And just because you're quiet doesn't mean you're weak. In fact, silence can be the strongest statement you ever make. Sometimes, silence is your boldest declaration that your spirit is tethered to God, not swayed by people's opinions. Do you want to grow? Do you want to live with steady peace? Then start protecting your energy. Guard your mind. Be incredibly intentional about what deserves your voice, because your voice is powerful. And whatever is powerful must also be protected. Be silent and let peace become your greatest weapon. There's a reason God commands us to be still. It's not just about stopping physical movement. It's about quieting the storm within. Because silence is more than the absence of noise. It's the presence of trust. And in the next part, we'll reflect on what it truly means to trust God. Not just with your silence, but with your future. Previously, we reflected on how silence becomes a weapon of peace and a declaration of trust. But what does that trust really sound like when the answers don't come? It sounds like this: Lord, I don't know what you're doing right now, but I believe you're doing something good. That kind of silence, the kind rooted in faith, is where strength is born. Often we get so caught up in our own voices, talking, planning, overthinking, worrying, that we forget God already holds the solution. We act as if more words, more effort, or more stress might somehow move things forward. But faith doesn't grow louder through noise. It grows deeper through stillness. Stillness teaches us to stop asking why and start declaring, I trust you anyway. That's where real trust shows up, when we can't see the road ahead, when nothing makes sense, and when prayers seem to bounce off the ceiling. It's in those uncertain, quiet, dim places that faith comes alive. And it's in those moments that silence becomes power. Not the silence of giving up, but the silence of full surrender. The kind of silence that says, even when I don't understand what's happening, I'm confident in who holds my future. God doesn't always provide explanations. He doesn't always send blueprints or reveal the whole picture. But he does promise his presence. And sometimes, all he's waiting for is for us to stop talking long enough to feel it. You won't hear the whisper of the Holy Spirit if your mind is filled with fear and your mouth is filled with complaints. But when you finally quiet the inner storm, you begin to realize something powerful. He's been there all along. He never left. Some of you are walking through a season right now that feels confusing, heavy, and unmoving. You're trying to trust, but nothing seems to be shifting. Nothing is changing. So what do you do when the silence lingers and the waiting feels endless? Let's talk about that next. In the last part, we explored how trust is often born in silence, when we surrender control and choose stillness over striving. But what happens when nothing changes, even after you've surrendered? Nothing is moving. Nothing is shifting. The doors remain closed, and the silence stretches longer than you expected. And in that space, panic tries to creep in. You're tempted to force a solution, to go back to what's familiar, to compromise your values, to speak up just to feel in control again. You feel the pull to do something, anything to make the waiting end. But sometimes the most powerful move you can make is no move at all. Just stand, just trust, just be silent, and let God be God. Think of the children of Israel standing at the edge of the Red Sea. Behind them, an army of enemies. In front of them, a vast body of water with no bridge, no boat, no visible escape, no way forward, no way back. What did God say in that impossible moment? He didn't tell them to build a plan. He didn't tell them to swim. He said, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. In their stillness, in their obedience, the sea split wide open. Not because they acted, but because they trusted. That's the kind of God we serve. A God who specializes in making a way where there is no way. But notice this. He didn't move when they spoke. He moved when they stopped speaking. When they stopped panicking. When they laid down their need to control the outcome. Because surrender isn't passive. It's an act of faith. It's the moment you say, God, I give this fully to you. You can't hold the pen and ask God to write your story at the same time. Eventually, you must place it in his hands. You must reach that point where you say, even when I can't see it, I'll trust you. Even when I don't hear anything, I know you're near. Even when everything looks still on the surface, I believe you're working behind the scenes. And just when it feels like nothing is happening, that's often when God is doing the most. So how do you keep standing when the wait gets longer than you imagined? Let's unpack that in the next part. In the previous part, we reflected on the power of surrender, on choosing to trust even when nothing seems to be changing. But what does that kind of trust really look like when the silence lingers? It's a trust that is quiet, deep, and unwavering. And that kind of trust is what moves heaven. It's easy to say, I trust God, when everything is working in your favor. When the doors are opening, when the prayers are answered quickly, and when blessings seem to flow without interruption. But what happens when the doors stay closed? What about when the answers are delayed, and the only thing you receive is silence. That's where real trust is tested. That's when faith becomes more than words. It becomes your posture. It becomes your strength. Because trust doesn't always come with bold declarations. Sometimes it simply waits. Not anxiously, not fearfully, but quietly and humbly. It waits without demanding a deadline. It waits without requiring God to explain himself. It waits because it knows something deeper, that God is too faithful to fail, too good to forget, and far too wise to make a mistake. So don't let the silence scare you. Don't let the delay shake you. Silence is not absence. It's often preparation. God hasn't abandoned you. He hasn't overlooked you. He's building something in you that can't be rushed. He's growing your faith, stretching your patience, and teaching you to walk by trust, not by what you see, not by what you feel. He's showing you that sometimes what you truly need isn't more answers, it's more of him. And one day, when the silence breaks and the breakthrough finally comes, you'll look back and see the purpose in the pause. You'll realize why he didn't let you rush ahead. You'll thank him for holding you in that still, quiet place until your heart was finally ready to carry the blessing he had prepared. So trust him. Trust him when it doesn't make sense. Trust him when the silence is deafening. Trust him when every part of you wants to panic or quit. Because sometimes the loudest expression of faith is the quietest heart. And in the next part, we'll reflect on how that quiet heart leads us into a deeper kind of victory. One that doesn't depend on circumstances, but on divine confidence. In the last part, we saw that the deepest kind of trust often comes in silence, when you no longer need answers to believe God is working. But what happens when that silence meets change, especially in your relationships? Be silent and let your trust speak louder than your words. There will come a time in your life when God begins shifting the people around you. The connections that once felt solid start to loosen. The circle that once felt safe begins to shrink. And if you're not discerning, you might mistake the shift for punishment. But it's not punishment, it's preparation. It's protection. What feels like rejection could actually be divine redirection. In those moments, silence isn't just about maturity. It becomes survival, a quiet strength, a posture that says, I don't need to understand it all. I just need to trust the one who does. Because not everyone who starts the journey with you is meant to finish it. Not everyone who cheers you on in one season is supposed to walk with you into the next. And sometimes, the most painful part of growth is realizing you've outgrown people you once thought you'd never have to live without. But here's the truth. You don't need to make a public announcement. You don't need to explain your distance. You don't have to justify your peace. Let God handle the separation. Let him turn the page. Some relationships are for a reason, others for a season. And some are never meant to follow you past the chapter they helped you write. When God starts a new scene in your story, your role isn't to cling to the characters who no longer fit. It's to walk forward in faith. You don't need closure when you have peace. You don't need revenge when you've been released. You don't need to chase after those who walked away when God is clearly calling you ahead. But let's be honest, our flesh still craves answers, doesn't it? We want to know why they changed, why they left, why they turned their backs, why they said one thing and did another. And everything in us wants to speak up, to defend ourselves, to confront the pain. So what do we do with that urge to speak when God is calling us to stay silent? Let's dig into that in the next part. Previously, we explored the deep emotional pull to speak up when people walk away, especially when it hurts. But what if silence is actually God's way of protecting your voice for something greater? We all feel the urge to expose betrayal, to confront the dishonor, to explain our side of the story, to defend our name when it's been dragged through the dirt. But hear this, friend, silence is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's the quiet strength of someone who knows that what God reveals in his timing will always speak louder than anything you could say right now. You don't have to announce what they did. You don't need to broadcast your pain. You don't have to destroy their reputation to validate your hurt. Because God saw it all. He heard the whispered conversations behind closed doors. He watched as they tried to shut doors he meant for you to walk through. He saw the manipulation, the gossip, the subtle sabotage. But he also said, "Vengeance is mine, not yours, not your words, not your emotions, his." And when you release that battle into his hands, silence becomes more than a response. It becomes your weapon. There's a kind of silence that speaks louder than 1,000 words. A silence that disorients the enemy because it shows restraint. A silence that declares, "I know who I am. I know whose I am. I don't need to fight for a seat at any table because my God prepares one for me right in front of my enemies." That's what divine confidence looks like. You don't walk in it because you're flawless. You walk in it because you're covered. Because you trust the one who sees what no one else does. And sometimes, those who left had to leave so you could finally hear God's voice without distraction. Sometimes, betrayal had to break your heart so God could refine it. And sometimes, the silence was the very thing that allowed your discernment to return because their noise had drowned it out. And when God removes someone from your life, he doesn't need your permission. He simply asks for your obedience. But what does obedience look like when your heart is still healing? Let's explore that in the next part. In the last part, we saw how God doesn't need your permission to remove what no longer serves your purpose, only your obedience. But what happens when you still don't understand why it had to happen? We don't always understand it in the moment. We don't always see the purpose hiding behind the pain. But there will come a day, maybe not today, maybe not even soon, when you'll look back and realize that God wasn't punishing you. He was protecting you. He was saving your time, your calling, your future, and yes, your soul. Some of the people God removed from your life weren't just distractions. They were delays. And in his mercy, he made space for your purpose to finally breathe again. What felt like abandonment was actually alignment. That's why you must be careful not to reopen doors God has already closed. Don't try to force conversations with people who've made it clear they're committed to misunderstanding you. Don't chase after those who have already let go of you. The more you try to explain, the more you drain your spirit. But when you choose silence, when you surrender the hurt instead of feeding it, when you trust God to handle what you can't see, he begins a different kind of work. He restores you quietly, beautifully, and without your help. That's when healing really begins. Not when you win the argument. Not when the truth finally comes out. Not even when they apologize. Healing begins when you can sit in silence and still sense God's presence wrapping around you. When you can walk away from a painful ending without bitterness in your heart. When you can honestly pray for those who hurt you, even when they never own what they did. That kind of peace, it doesn't come from people. It's not man-made. It's divinely given. And maybe you're right there right now. Maybe you're in the middle of a sudden separation you didn't expect. Maybe your heart is aching for people you never thought you'd lose. Maybe the temptation to speak out, to prove your innocence, is burning inside you. But listen closely. There's more strength in your silence than in your defense. So what does it look like to walk forward with that strength? We'll step into that in the next part. In the last part, we explored how real healing begins when you stop fighting for control and start trusting God in the silence. Now let's go one step deeper into what God does with that silence. Because the God who sees what's done in secret will reward you openly. And when that moment comes, no lie, no betrayal, no misunderstanding, and no rumor will be able to stop what he has planned for your life. So stay silent and let God remove what he needs to remove. Let him clear the space for what he's preparing to bring. There is something sacred, holy even, about silence that is born from surrender. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of defeat, but the kind that says, "Lord, I've spoken all I can. I've done all I know to do. Now I'm releasing it to you. That's the moment when miracles begin to move. Not when you try harder, not when you fight louder, but when you finally put the weapons down and open your hands. Because life has a way of stretching you. It tests your patience, your resolve, your endurance. There will be seasons when everything feels delayed. The dreams you've prayed over, the healing you've cried for, the breakthrough you've been waiting on. And in those silent moments, when nothing seems to be moving, something beautiful is growing. Silence becomes the soil where patience is rooted, where trust deepens. Because sometimes God's greatest works aren't revealed in loud moments of progress, but in the quiet tension of waiting. You might be praying right now, and it feels like heaven is closed. You're not seeing signs. You're not hearing answers. Nothing seems to be changing. But hear this. Just because God is silent doesn't mean he is absent. His silence is not a sign of inactivity. It's preparation. Some of God's deepest, most life-shaping work happens in the quiet. In the stillness, he forms your character. In the waiting, he tests your motives. In the delay, he purifies your desires. And here's the truth, one that changes everything. Let's unpack that in the next part. In the last part, we were reminded that God's silence is not absence, it's preparation. And now, we see that learning to wait in that silence is one of the greatest acts of faith you'll ever walk through. Waiting in silence doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing the hard, invisible work of trusting day after day. It means waking up, showing up, and holding on even when there's no visible sign that anything is changing. It means choosing faith when doubt is louder, choosing hope when everything around you whispers despair. It means resting in God's promise instead of wrestling with his process. When you learn to be silent in the face of delay, you begin to walk by faith, not by sight. You stop craving instant results. You stop needing applause, confirmation, or clarity. You stop expecting everything to make perfect sense because your confidence no longer comes from what you can see. It comes from who you know is in control. That kind of silence is anything but passive. It is deeply powerful. It declares, I don't need to rush what God is doing. I don't have to beg for what's already promised. I don't need to force open a door that isn't ready to move. If God spoke it, I will stand on it, even if I have to wait in this hallway a little longer. And let me tell you, sometimes the hallway is holy. That in between space, between what God said and when he brings it to pass, is where your roots grow deep. It's where your pride dies. It's where your faith is refined and matured. Some of the most powerful, anointed men and women in Scripture didn't meet God on a mountaintop. They encountered him in the stillness of delay. Look at Joseph in the prison cell, David hiding in the wilderness, Moses wandering through the desert, even Jesus lying silent in the tomb. Each one of them faced seasons of silence. Each one endured divine delay. But in every case, without exception, God was not late. So what does it mean to hold on when the silence stretches longer than expected? We'll continue with that in the next part. In the last part, we reflected on how some of the most powerful transformations happen in seasons of silence and delay. And now, we come to a deeper truth. God's timing is never off. He was right on time, always has been, because heaven doesn't operate according to our clocks. It moves according to his purpose. And while we often see silence as punishment, what if it's actually mercy? Think about it. If God gave you what you were asking for before you were spiritually or emotionally ready, could it actually harm you? If he opened a door before your character was prepared to walk through it, what was meant to be a blessing might end up feeling like a burden. God loves you far too much to rush what he's doing in your life. That's why he waits. And in that waiting, he invites you into silence. Not to frustrate you, not to break your spirit, but to strengthen you from the inside out, to stretch your faith, to align your desires with his, to bring you to the end of your striving so that you learn to truly depend on Him. Because when the time is right, when your heart is steady, your soul is surrendered, your motives are purified, God moves. And when He moves, it won't be because of your effort, your planning, or your push. It will be because He ordained it, because you waited in faith and He honored your trust. Yes, I know, it's hard. It hurts when the answers don't come. It stings when your dreams feel out of reach. It aches when your prayers are met with silence. But hear this clearly. Your silence is not wasted. God hears the cry behind your stillness. He sees the tears you've shed in secret. He counts each one. He holds them close. And though He may not answer in your timing, He always responds in the right time. So be still. Stay silent. Keep showing up. Keep believing even when it's hard. Keep surrendering even when you're tired. Let the silence shape you. Let it teach you how to wait, how to listen, how to trust. Because the silence won't last forever. One day, the silence will break. And when it does, you'll see that God was working all along, right in the middle of the quiet. Be silent and let your surrender create space for God's supernatural timing. Wishing you strength, peace, and unshakable hope. Stay encouraged, stay faithful, and don't forget to subscribe to Mindset Daily for more messages like this. May you be blessed with health, happiness, and unwavering faith.